Good evening. It's Thursday or Wednesday night. I'm Lauren Crow, Communications Director for the Troth, and it is time for Heathen Conversations. And joining me tonight is our favorite shope. It is Ben Waggoner. Ben, say hi to the people.
Hi to the people.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is a bit of a cheat for me. Because for those of you who don't know, Ben is my kindred brother. I've known Ben for almost 20 years, and we do a podcast together. So if this is a softball interview for me, I'm not gonna lie.
All right.
You
Do
know,
you realize?
considering what we've got coming up in the next few weeks, I needed it.
All right. Lauren, you are aware that with that tapestry behind your head, it kind of looks like you're wearing a horned helmet.
Yeah, it's a bear.
Oh, very nice. I
Yeah.
approve. I approve.
For those of you who don't know, we are also in the Black Bear Kindred.
Mm-hmm.
So
And you've got a black bear behind you. I like it.
do. If you are in the chat tonight watching the stream and you are a Troth member, toss a 1 into chat. I want to see all our Troth members that are here tonight. And if you're watching on the replay, then be sure to comment and let us know that you were here.
Is this where I can say something like "Everybody in the house say whoa"?
Yeah.
Okay.
How about everybody in the house say "woad"?
There we go. All the heathen in the house say "woad."
Mm-hmm. All right. Good to see everybody. And I apologize. This may go a little off the rails. You will now get to experience what it's like to be Ben's wife and our kindred sister, because Ben and I can get a little much sometimes. So Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your position in the Troth?
What? We got Danos in Yerdagum, Theod König. Okay, maybe not that far back.
No.
Okay. I grew up in South Louisiana with a very conventional and somewhat boring Methodist upbringing. And that would have been that, except I went off to college at this place called Tulane University in New Orleans. And I promise this is all going to get relevant. My freshman year on my hall, there was a football player that we just knew as Big Mikey. And he theoretically had a roommate, but his roommate either died or majored in architecture, which were basically pretty much the same thing. The end result was that nobody ever saw you again. And his girlfriend kind of moved in with him, and she was really nice. And then that spring, they parted on good terms because she started going out with a tarot card reader in Jackson Square. Jackson Square, if you have not been to New Orleans, is at the center of the French Quarter, and there's lots of artists and caricature drawers and jugglers and musicians and various tarot card and rune and fortune teller people. And she learned how to read tarot. She started doing it herself while still maintaining a college career. And she became the consort of a guy named Jarek Danerson. Jarek was the founder of a pagan tradition in the Gulf South called Southshire, and apparently some offshoots of that are still going. And I met him, and he turned out to be an absolutely fascinating and slightly roguish fellow. And he was the first person who told me about Asatru. This was in early 1988, which means it was right after the AFA had fallen apart and the Ring of Troth had just come together. And I was interested in it, but I kind of stayed on the fence. I didn't declare myself heathen right away. it would take a bit more reading and a bit more thought, and encountering a book called A Book of Troth, published by Edward Thorson in Moe's Books in Berkeley, California, which is where I ended up in grad school. And I did not officially decide I was heathen until the end of 2000. Went out to the desert in the close to New Year's and kind of announced it to myself and the gods and whatever coyotes happened to be listening. That's the way I roll. And I joined the Troth, and they haven't been able to get rid of me, so I'm still here.
And you have served, most people, I think, in the Troth now know you as the Shope,
Mhm.
the translator of the things, but
Right.
you've served several other roles. You have been on the Reed.
Let me see. I became steward my first Troth moot was 03, and that was also when I became the steward for Arkansas, and later the steward for Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, or as I called it, the steward of Vanaheim,
Yes.
because our part of the country is very Vanek. Because the University of Arkansas sports mascot is, of course, the Razorbacks, which is a big pig. So that's very Vanek. And the Vanier's custom of marriage between brother and sister is, well, also, the shoe kind of fits. So, we wear it. I'm sort of kidding, mostly. But anyway.
And then you pawned that off on your kindred sister at some point.
Right, I did. And 2004, I got elected to the Reed, and that was an interesting time. And then, as now, we were kind of trying to turn the corner from a gaggle of very nerdy enthusiasts who were all kind of doing their own thing to an organization with something closer to professional standards. And that's a process that is still going on. Well, it was going on then, and it didn't help that at the time, the Troth was really trying to be inclusive of everybody, which meant we had a fairly sizable folkish wing, and trying to get along with them was it had its moments.
It would be about the time I came in the first time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then came back later because I basically burned out with the arguing.
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
people
it
think
was.
about, like, the debates people get in now on Heathen Spaces now, and I'm just like, "Oh, you sweet summer children."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. We've calmed down a bit. I mean, I think, as we've grown and, dare I say it, matured, the really volatile people and the people who seriously need insane levels of drama have tended to drop off. And, the people who are actually interested in sticking around and making the organization work have stuck around, mostly because I think we're, just too pig-headed to leave.
And so,
Or
Justin was
as
asking you, so you've been in the Troth about 20 years?
That's right.
Yeah.
I guess I could have just said that and not babbled for the past 5 minutes, but
No, you're good.
all right.
So, when did you start in with publications?
Okay. Quando t'aprillo with the shortest sotto. No, that's too far back. My first Troth moot was 03, and we had a number of Troth moots at that time in South Indiana at Lincoln State Park. Beautiful place with a nice lake and nice cabins and some historic sites related to Abraham Lincoln's boyhood. And this is the first time I'd ever been in a room with other heathens before, because as far as I knew, I was the only one in Arkansas. My little town of Conway, Arkansas, is not exactly a hotbed of non-mainstream religious activity, although there's more than you might think. Anyway, so I got up early my first morning there, And I recommend that people do this. If you're at a gathering and you don't know anybody there and you want to make friends and you want to, ease yourself in and, introduce yourself properly and learn what's what, go to the kitchen. So that morning, I was stirring a big pot of oatmeal, and everybody is waking up, and Diana Paxson walked in and produced. I said to Diana I pointed to the oatmeal and said, "I've been through a grueling experience." Okay, I'm imagining everybody just laughing
Yeah.
uproariously.
Yeah.
And
Good job.
I can assume what I can only assume was revenge. She asked me if I would like to help with some minor little edits for the second edition of this book we were working on called Our Troth.
I'm sorry. You guys have to understand, I was there at this point. Like when
Mhm.
Ben was editing, that's when Ben and I met. So I was kind of around for that.
Right. And the
I
minor
remember.
Yeah, the minor little job of helping out with a few edits turned into a 4-year slog, by which time we were calling it the Baton Death Book. Um, can I give a little background about the book Our Troth?
No, please. That's what we're here. We want to. This is kind of a time to get to know you better, to get to know parts of the truth history that we may not know. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right. Okay, where to begin? All right, Edward Thorson had this book called A Book of Troth that he actually got Llewellyn to publish in, I want to say 91, the first edition. Might have been 90. I forget exactly, but that's when that came out. And that was a brief introduction to the ways of worship, the gods, the rituals, the ritual calendar, and so on. And it contained his personal vision for what the troth was to be, which in some ways we have gotten a bit away with. The original idea was that clergy would all have university degrees in Germanic studies and basically function as more or less Teutonic rabbis, not
And they would,
primarily as ritual leaders, but as resources of lore and knowledge who would work out how to do the rituals and do them right.
and every city, major city, would have a Hoff, right?
And every major city was going to have a Hoff with a university trained Gothi. Um, and this was basically going to rekindle heathenry as the dominant religious expression of our culture.
And that was kind of an interesting time at Llewellyn, in the early 90s, because wasn't he at the time? He was an acquisitions editor, wasn't he at the time?
Yes, he'd gotten his degree, his PhD from University of Texas, hadn't been able to land a full-time academic job, not a tenure track one anyway. But he did work for a while as acquisitions editor for Llewellyn, and he did manage to get a number of very important books into print. He convinced Llewellyn to publish Freya Aswyn's Leaves of Yggdrasil and Kveldulf's Teutonic Magic and Teutonic Religion. He wasn't able to stop the publication of some things that he really disapproved of, like DJ Conway's Norse Magic, which she pretty much made up. And he now refers to books like this as, quote, occultizoid nincompoopery, which is just a phrase I really love. The man does have a real way with words. So he ended up quitting doing that. But a Book of Troth was published, and Kveldulf then got the idea, hey, we can do this even better. So I'm still not sure how he did it. I can only assume ridiculous amounts of coffee were involved. But Kveldulf was working on his graduate degree at the time, And he managed to assemble, both from the writings of others and from his own copious work, a book that would end up being over 700 pages in print. And that was the first edition of Our Troth. And that came out at the end of 1993. And a few years later, the Troth moved to this newfangled thing called the World Wide Web, and ended up putting most of the first edition of Our Troth online. And when I was looking around in the late 90s at the Heathen scene, wondering if I wanted to dip a toe into this particular pond or lake or ocean, whatever you'd like to call it.
Back then, it was a pond.
Okay, pretty much. When I was wondering if I should dip a toe into this pond, that online version of Our Troth was far and away the best sourced and most thoroughly researched book on heathenry that was out there. You know, you could tell that this person in the Troth had definitely done his homework.
Yeah.
And as a holder of a PhD degree myself, I appreciate concentrated nerdiness. I am a connoisseur of it, you might say.
So Ben, Lonnie would like to just know, he was on the read when a very thorny issue came up revolving Our Troth. He just wants to know how your mental stability is doing.
What is that?
Yeah, you're a college professor. You have none.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, does he want to hear about that issue that came up?
No, well, we can. The point is that he just wanted to check on you. I just wanted to let him.
All right.
And also Gus, Lincoln State Park was the first Troth moot I went to, was also at Lincoln State Park, and it was really a magical place.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna just take a second. I think we do have Troth moot coming up face to face for the first time in like 3 years, and it's gonna be at Meeman Shelby Forest State Park, just outside of Memphis, which is a place that there's a place that has a lot of pagan events, so they're super used to weirdos like us. Also SCA events, so like I said, super used to weirdos. So please consider coming. Registration should be going up pretty in the next week or two. But it is a great place. I think you guys are really going to enjoy Meeman Shelby Forest State Park and Troth moot coming up.
Okay, well, you know what else Memphis is famous for?
Barbecue.
True. Famous
Elvis.
for ribs. And no, I was thinking that we ought to have a Troth moot theme song for this year. And I was thinking, well, since my baby left me, I found a new home to call. It's down at the end of Lonely Street. It's Heartbreak Mead Hall. Oh, he's so lonely, baby. You're so lonely, baby. You hail the gods and raise a horn. Thank you very much.
But yeah, so if you want more information on that, please let me know. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to our kindred, which is Black Bear Kindred out of Little Rock. We're kind of the home base kindred for this, so we are really looking forward to hosting you guys for this. Mm-hmm. So,
that's right. I might even have more songs by then. You'll definitely want to come for those.
Oh yeah, we'll have a lot more. I'm sure Dee will be very happy to have you share them with someone else. So
anyway,
so that first edition gets published on the web. So you come into the Troth, and we're going to put out the second edition of Our Troth.
Right. And what was going to be just a matter of changing some god names and things like that ended up becoming 4 years of work, writing some new chapters, splitting the thing into 2 volumes instead of 1, and our first real introduction to print-on-demand publishing. The first edition had been printed at a local print shop in Seattle, as a matter of fact. The person handling publications at the time was based there. And we paid for a big batch of books and shipped them out ourselves, and when they were gone, there were no more. But now, in the brave new world of 2006, There were several companies out there that would print books on demand, which meant that we didn't have to physically warehouse copies. We didn't have to ship out orders ourselves. And we could keep the book in print as long as we wanted to. So that was where we and I learned how to do that. And I set up an account with a company that was called Book Surge,
Yes, I remember.
which ended up turning into Create Space and then getting assimilated by Amazon. But that way we were able to keep volume 2 in print for well until what 2020, I guess.
Yeah, until this new one came out.
Right. Okay.
Which was really great, and I think a lot of people, even outside of the Troth, really really enjoyed and depended on volume 2, but by the
Mhm.
time 2020 came around, volume 2 was what, 14 years old?
Yeah, okay, well, the second edition, volume 1 had come out in
Yeah, or second
2006.
edition. Yeah.
Volume 2 had come out in 2007, and there was a lot of new scholarship and some new, archaeological discoveries and things like that. And heathenry had also shifted in that it was almost all Norse plus the Theodish in 1994. But certainly by 20, good gravy, I think like 2018 was when I started working on the third edition. There are more groups that are doing, heathenry that's inspired by, pre-Christian England or Germany, that are not necessarily Theodish, but go off in their own directions. And of course, we now have Ergloiva, which I think is how you pronounce it, which is based on German lore, specifically what was brought to America by the Pennsylvania Germans.
Well, and I think that even like the nomenclature changed so drastically, because when even in the 2000s, we were Asatru was still the predominant word. Like,
Right.
oh, you were Theodish or you were Asatru. There was really, like, heathen
Mhm.
was a word, but it wasn't the dominant word. Whereas, and Odinist was still kind of an okay word.
Mhm.
Now,
I mean, Odinist
heathen is
was
the
used.
dominant word, and I wouldn't touch
Mhm.
Odinist with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, Odinist was, of course, coined by the Odinic Rite, who is pretty far off the scale on the right hand side of it. But then the word had also been used by Ed Fitch in his classic book Rites of Odin, which will still, you know, cause seasoned heathens to roll their eyes when they hear it, because it has great illustrations, but he pretty much pulled almost everything out of his posterior.
I think the best way to describe that book for all you Southerners is, "Well, bless his heart."
Yeah, exactly. Bless his heart.
Bless his heart.
Right. And the other thing that had happened is when we were working on the second edition in '06, there still was, as I mentioned, a soft folkish wing of the Troth that had, a number of prominent members. We had just finished the term of a rather folkish steersman, who is no longer with us. And really, it's probably just as well. We had folkish people on the Reed, um, which led to an event on the Reed that I still just refer to as the Great Big Unpleasant Thing of 2006, which was not a great deal of fun to go through, but that was a blow up where a lot of our folkish members ended up walking out,
And that
which is
was
just as well, but at the time it
yeah,
was kind of a pain.
and that was, that's because, for the longest time, I think one thing that a lot of people who came into heathenry in the last 5 to 10 years may not have a conception of is as heathens, back then, maybe the grand sum total of heathens in the United States was like maybe 1,000, 2,000 of us. And
Yeah,
we
we
felt
had
like we had to
Mhm,
be a big tent because there just weren't that many of us.
mhm. Yeah, we had, I'd say we might have averaged it had its ups and downs, but we might have averaged 300 to 400 members during that time.
And we're way
Mhm.
we're north of 1,000 now.
Right,
More, I don't know what the exact number is, but I know it's over 1,000 because of website and membership stuff I've been working on.
right. So yeah, we've grown a lot, and when you're trying to be all things to everybody, we constantly had little blow-ups that had people storming out. When you're trying to invite everybody in, you're going to invite people in who just cannot possibly get along with each other, and one or sometimes both will leave. I see
So Gu
Robert has asked
Yeah,
what?
it's Gus. He wants to know where they focus at that time.
Okay, the Troth was trying to attract as wide a spectrum as possible.
Well, I
So,
think he means the Reed members and
oh, in 2006, it was pretty much an even distribution on the spectrum. A couple of people that were very politically and religiously liberal, and one person who was married to an outright Nazi supporter. And I'm not kicking around the term lightly. That's what the guy really was. And a bunch of people that were in between. And you can't have a mix like that. It's like saying, well, why can't we just have Mr. Charcoal and Mr. Sulfur and Mr. Saltpeter just all get together and be friends?
that I think that's important,
Mhm,
especially now as the Troth moves from I would say moving even forward from an inclusive organization to an actively anti-racist organization.
mhm,
Um, we can't create a place that is safe for people of color and people who are queer,
mhm.
who are not, we can't really create that space if we allow those kind of people in. Paradox of intolerance and all that.
Right.
So
Yeah,
our lovely public relations director, who's also named Ben, that's why I have to a lot of times there's a lot of like, which Ben am I talking about in my life lately? Um, Talking about like the history of the term folkish and like what that movement was or what that movement is even.
okay. Folkish is a direct translation of the German word Völkisch, which comes out of this late 19th, early 20th century German um, social movement in which people are looking for a religion that's somehow intrinsic in Germanness. In some versions of it, basically being German was the religion itself, that being German meant you had a special connection in your heart to a German God. In some cases, that might be the Christian God, reinterpreted quite a bit. In other cases, it might be Wotan. But the idea of the Volkish revival was that whatever your religion is, it's intrinsic in you, and that's a function of your ethnicity and ultimately your bloodline. And people who are not of your bloodline do not have the right and really shouldn't have the desire to worship your particular German Volkish god. And as I've mentioned, there were some Volkish groups that were Christian and reinterpreted Jesus as a Germanic warrior battling against the evil Jews. There were some people that didn't go with the Christian stuff, but believed in one God who was sort of incarnate in Germanness.
Oh, and don't forget about British Israelism, which is one of my favorites.
Oh, right. Okay. There was also over in Britain at the time, there was this belief that the British were actually the true descendants of the tribes of Israel and the Jews were just usurpers.
Yeah.
And, the real promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were actually made to the ancestors of the British. And
And it's always interesting, especially given the DNA studies that we have found.
mhm,
People talk about, oh, well, Vikings, I'm a descendant of the Vikings. And then you get into the DNA of the Vikings and you find African DNA, Asian DNA. Like there was no monolithic white, which that wasn't even a thing back
mhm.
then, DNA among them.
Yeah, one of
Um,
the Oseberg ship is one of the most famous ship burials, with a enormous wealth of artifacts. Two women were buried in it. One of them, the bones are so badly preserved we can't get DNA. The other one's got DNA markers that make it look like she could have come from Persia.
well, I know
So what is
there
she
was a
doing in
study
there?
that came out in Nature, I think in 2020, that
Mhm,
basically they did a survey of like almost 1,400 graves and did DNA
mhm,
testing, and that had a huge genetic diversity of
mhm.
those, and those were mostly in Norway and Greenland.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
want
the
to bring
Vikings
this.
were not some kind of pure
No,
group. I mean, and as a biologist, the way that you keep a population pure is basically by inbreeding it. So yeah, the the if the Vikings had been this sort of pure bunch of Aryans, they would have all had 6 fingers and played the banjo.
I think I want to bring something up that Gus has brought up. I think it's important that he was there, and the people who got elected who were folkish were well liked, and they were voted in. They didn't come
Mhm.
storming in.
Right. Yeah.
Back it was it was a very different time. I hate to
Hmm.
say that. And it was a very different time.
Hmm. And one of the points that I took from Jennifer Snook's book on American heathenry is that for all of our unique religion, we're not really unique as a population in that
Mhm.
we how do I want to put this? We are part of wider society, and things that happen to us mirror things that are going on in the wider society. And one thing we've definitely seen is increase in polarization. In the early 2000s, you could still have people that said, well, I'm folkish, and in my own kindred we don't have any of those people in there, but I'm willing to play nice because I like the Troth.
Yeah.
Our folkish, the guy I've got in mind who was our folkish steersman, was not loud about it. I never heard him actually say anything when we didn't have many, but we did have a couple of members of color who would show up at Troth moots, and I never saw him being anything other than, perfectly respectful and professional to him.
And I
And
do
it
feel like
was easier
we've
to
been
off
people
pedal
have
it.
been emboldened to say the quiet part out loud more.
Right. Yeah.
So somebody had a question about the folkish movement and theodism and the overlap and
Hmm.
ideological overlap, and what you had seen, or what was it, or is it? And I know I can speak to more modern stuff, but at that time when they were more present in the Troth, what was your impression there?
At the time, the Theodes people that I knew didn't particularly bang the folkish drum especially hard. Um, okay, Theodish belief revolved around trying to recreate not just the form of ancient ways of worship, but the mindset as well. So Theodish groups were organized the way that originally Old English society was organized, where you came in and as your provisional membership, you were called a thrall and you did the dirty work at feast and things like that. And also theoretically absorbed the values of the group as you learned about it. And then you bought your freedom And then there was this whole system of ranks that you could rise through. And ultimately, it all came from the person of the king, Thomas Germain, better known as Garmon Lord. And there was a tendency to be fairly politically conservative, certainly in the Theodish groups in Texas that we, Lauren, went and visited and
Yes.
stumbled with a couple of times. Oh, did we stumble? Wow. Sorry,
Stumble till you stumble.
yeah, lasted all night, some of them. I don't recall them putting a great deal of emphasis on race or ethnicity. I think they thought that was kind of beneath them at the time. This is not necessarily true now.
No.
The current revival of the Theodish movement, Lauren, you would know more about this than I, but the guy who's basically the second in command after Garmon Lord, what are the details of his group?
So there are several groups now that are very much kind of in second command, the ones that Garmon Lord are working with, that have been very openly racist. And to the point that there were a whole lot of people who worked in law enforcement who lost their jobs because of their ties to very openly racist basically behavior and online and in person, who were all involved with that group. And it's kind of moved in that direction. There's also been some very problematic behavior out of some of the other groups, protecting child predators. It's gotten very problematic, and for a lot of reasons. And I don't know if that's just a function. And then, of course, Dan Halloran. So, I mean, if you don't, and I don't want to deep dive into this too far, but Ben and I do a podcast, and it's called Heathen History. And we have full episodes on both Dan and the Theodish if you guys want to go listen to them. But so I kind of want to move out from that, because what I really do want to talk about is the new version of our Troth, because we're at. Go ahead.
Where I was going with all this before we did our deep dive into the old dirty laundry is that when it came time for the third edition, one of the reasons was that we were no longer trying to be all things to everyone. We have a more firmly defined position than we ever did. We had gone from, I think we'd realized that no matter how big you make your tent, it never seems to have room for all the clowns that come in. And we were defining ourselves a lot more as an inclusive group, and one that was no longer shy about saying it, and one that was no longer, oh gosh whiz, can't we all get along? And it was necessary to say that more firmly than we had. The second edition, as I read it now, I mean, I think it was an improvement, but in some ways it's still kind of mealy-mouthed about certain things. And it's important now not to be that, and to state what we are and why we are what we are as clearly as possible. And if that bothers some people, then, obla-di, obla-da, life goes on. And so this edition has been written in the first volume, the one about heathen history, which came out in 2020. We've been a lot more forthright about the Nazis and about the German Volkish romanticism that they came from and that influenced them, and about some of the very unsavory connections of certain modern heathen groups. We tried to air a lot more of our dirty laundry than we had in the past. and did a lot of background research, which also ended up fueling our Heathen History podcast. So I actually found that you can get an almost complete run of the AFA's journal, the Runestone, on this ancient and eldritch technology from a distant time before the dawn of history, known as microfilm. I don't know why I was moving my hands. It just felt like the thing to do. So, I actually went back and read our really early primary sources to try to inform myself, what I was writing about, and to make sure we made our position as unmistakably clear as we could.
Ben actually got a copy of, so one of the earliest English language heathen groups was the First Anglican Church of Odin. Ben actually got books from Australia, wasn't it?
Well, the
Or
copies were held
scans from
in
Australia.
the copies were held in U.S. libraries, but the group was based in
Yeah.
Australia. It was founded by this eccentric lawyer from Tasmania by the name of A. Rudd Mills. And yeah, it's basically not very well understood Norse mythology mixed in with a bunch of Freemasonry and a bunch of anti-Semitism in the language of the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, which made it kind of a surreal experience to read. They sang hymns, except instead of ending with Amen, they ended with Wotan.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that. So yeah, we did as deep a dive as I could manage it into our primary sources and our history as a movement, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the downright surreal. I'm sure we could improve on it, but I did the best I could in the time that I had available. Volume 2 ended up focusing on the deities and also on the other gods, the other powers, the Alfar and the dwarves and the Valkyries and the Norns, everybody's in there. And that had to be rewritten to reflect a lot of the ways in which heathenry has evolved. The Loki chapter had to be completely redone because between 06 and now, there has developed a sizable Lokian community who sometimes have a reputation for being completely flaky, but in fact, it's not true. They include a lot of very serious, thoughtful, and dedicated people, and really smart people who've developed their own interpretations and ways of doing things. And I tried as much as I could not to be prescriptive, but to be descriptive. In other words, not say, this is how you are supposed to be heathen, but this is what heathens are doing. And that means you have to open up to, different perspectives. So we added a lot of stuff on Loki, a lot of stuff on all of the gods that's based on modern personal gnosis and practices that have grown up, and a lot more on deities that are not known from the Norse sources. So there's a lot more on goddesses like Nehelenia and the Rhineland Matroni. There's even a whole list of all the deities that we might only know from, one lousy inscription and that we have no other information about at all. I don't know that there's an active cultist today of Sandraudiga, but if anybody wants to go pray to her and see how she's doing these days, we put all the information I could find on Sandraudiga in our Troth.
And so the third volume, which is going to be coming out in June,
currently looks like this.
Yes.
This is not the finished text. This is the proofs. And as you can see,
it's a bit much.
Yeah, slowly but surely, I've been working on edits. You can see I've scribbled all over this page. I edit better from a printed text than I do on a computer screen. And I've been getting help from a number of people. Most recently, Anne Sheffield has been amazingly industrious and unsparing with the comments that she's been sending back. And the book will be much better for her involvement with it. And this is the one that's going to cover the practical side. How do you actually do this heathen thing? There's a chapter on ethics, and I don't try to forbid anybody from using the 9 noble virtues or other lists like that. I mean, it's not that different. You know, a lot of corporate mission statements will have a list of, principles. What is it? The Marines have a list of Marine values, and the Army's got theirs.
But
And,
you do
the
explain
Boy
this.
Scouts are
Yeah.
kind, thoughtful, reverent, clean, and 8 more. There's
Yeah.
nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but you have to do more thinking than just memorizing a list of words.
I disagree with you. If only because I don't think that those reflect accurately heathen values. I think they reflect the values of the Victorian era, which was heavily influenced in what was available to people in the 70s who were trying to create that very earliest part of Asatru.
Right,
But,
and I point
but
this
you know,
out.
that's me.
Well, I actually do point this out. On the one hand, it probably is better to try to live your life as courageous, truthful, and generous than it is to live your life as a stingy, sneaky, lying sack of dung. It's probably better to do that than to do the opposite. But yes, there's a lot of romanticized stuff in there. There's plenty of cases in the lore where people like Egil Skallagrimson decidedly did not live by the 9 noble virtues. He could be a real bastard when he wanted to.
And let's be honest, there are sometimes when, like, not telling someone that the dress that they love so much really makes their butt look big is just far better for everyone.
Right, exactly. Any one of those can be taken to an extreme that isn't virtuous. I mean, it may be a virtue to be courageous, but running up against an enemy that you can't possibly win, that you can't possibly beat, and getting yourself killed for no cause other than glory isn't really virtuous either, and it doesn't help.
Yes.
It's better to be industrious than lazy, but on the other hand, spending all of your energy on busy work doesn't really help and isn't particularly virtuous either. So we discuss this and try to come up with a more sound basis for what a real heathen ethics would look like. And of course, people will disagree, but we're trying.
And I think that it's, for me, I think it's pretty sound logic when you delve more into a more flexible ethic that's more concerned with, more of a situational ethic versus something that's very like black and white.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I thought about just replacing that whole chapter with one sentence. Don't be an asshole. But
Whedon's Law.
Or don't be an asshole unless they've really got it coming.
Yeah. So an addendum to Wheaton's Law.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, and there's also chapters on things like Inri. There's information on things like heathenry in prisons. I know I wrote a section on your rights, and it mainly focused on America because that is what I know. But your rights as a heathen in the workplace,
right?
Because there, we have very specific rights that are very important and are kind of, a lot of people, even people who are bosses and supervisors, may not necessarily know what your protected rights are.
Right. Yeah. We've also got chapters on racial and ethnic inclusion and on LGBTQ plus inclusion. laying out, both scientific findings and evidence from the lore as to why inclusion is actually closer to what our forebears actually did. There's no real warrant anywhere for saying, okay, we white people are the only people that can possibly worship Odin. The folkish, to the extent that they're using logic to justify their positions, they're just basically wrong. And I don't know that my chapter is actually going to influence anybody. I'm actually currently lurking on a very folkish venue under an assumed name, and 90% of what they're doing is posting memes of people in horn helmets. And that's pretty much it. I don't think they're going to engage with what I have to say, but if anybody does, at least it's out there and we can point to why we're inclusive and why we think that's a better way to be heathen, more in tune with what our ancestors mostly did, and more in tune with what we empirically know about things like, human genetics and prehistory, population migrations, things like that.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's basically a way of saying we're better than you, and we've got footnotes.
And I think that it's also, I mean, you basically presented a scientific paper debunking metagenetics. They never engaged that, so I don't have a bunch of hope.
Right. But I mean, at least it's on the record. At least we can say, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's why.
Yes. And I think that's really exciting. I think that's super exciting because, I'm really excited for this because it has a lot of that information, and I think it's going to be beneficial to a lot of new heathens.
Right.
Information on the care and feeding of a kindred, which I still need to finish my edits for.
Yes, you do. You definitely do. Information on the calendar, which is interesting because in recent years we have a lot of people showing interest in reconstructing the old lunar calendar. On the other hand, we have heathens of long standing that have really gotten used to something that's closer to the Wiccan wheel of the year. And we also have heathens that are modifying their practices based on things like the local climate and local crops and things that work for them. And the advice given is basically going to be, look, it's not our job to tell you when you're allowed to worship and when you're not. We think that part of growing heathenry is working out how to adapt it to your own land and your own conditions and your own lives. But we're ultimately not going to wade into the debate of should we be celebrating Yule on the solstice or was it actually in mid-January? We will present the evidence as best as we can. You figure out what you want to do with it.
Or when I like to celebrate heathen holidays?
Yeah,
that magical date called when everyone is free. Because when
hail
half your kindred works in healthcare, that's what you do.
Yep, hail the feast of when everyone is free. It's kind of, I'm sure the Vikings must have done that, Hey, Olaf, when can you get together for the Sumbul? Well, the mother-in-law is coming soon, and, then we got to take care of the kids and all that. So how about this Thursday? I'm sure. I
want to address this question here about, is the Troth welcoming to us politically center normies? Here's the thing. The Troth is going to be, at its core, we are an anti-racist organization. We are a pro-queer embracing organization. Beyond that, we try not to get involved in politics, but those are important things because those are part of hospitality.
Right. As a nonprofit, we're really not allowed to get into outright electioneering. Not that stops some of the mega churches, but we are not going to try to tell people who they can and can't vote for. We do need to be more active in our inclusion. But it's not like I would call you a heathen heretic if you voted for people whose positions I necessarily disagree with. That's ultimately on your own conscience.
Yeah. At the same time, as an organization, we are going to advocate towards things that are important, and that, to me, personally, and I am a member of the Read, but I am only speaking for myself. Anti-racist work, pro-queer inclusion work is hospitality. That is a heathen value, a huge heathen value. And working towards those things is a heathen value, and it's a Troth value, and it's something that we have embraced and that we're going to do. And to me, it's not political. To me, it's a religious value. And so are we absolutely going to move forward with that? Yes. When it comes to like, where do you, on things like religious rights, are we going to stand with that kind of thing? Yes. If we, if another pagan organization is facing issues with religious rights, are we going to stand with them? Yes. Are we going to get involved with, other political things? Probably not. But things that are genuine religious issues for us, yeah. I think that's important, and that's not political to me. That's a religious issue. That is, yeah.
Well, when we had that guy in New Zealand who went on the shooting spree and killed those people in those mosques, we issued a statement condemning that.
I wrote it.
Yeah, because he had things in his manifesto like seawall and Valhalla.
Yeah.
And that's a horrifying misuse of our religion. I guess the Viking times were very violent and things like that, but I can't find anything in the Havamal that says go shoot up a place just because the people have slightly more tanned skin and follow a monotheistic religion. That's just nuts.
Well, and we issued a statement, which I wrote.
Right.
After January 6th. And it wasn't a political statement. What we wrote was a statement against violence. We did not declare one side or the other. We wrote a statement against violence, and we wrote a statement in unison, an interfaith statement in unison with other religious groups. Like what we wrote was in unison with many, many other religious groups. It wasn't it didn't come from nowhere. We wrote it, as an interfaith thing. And that's, but part of that was because the main person that you saw on the news had a giant vault knot and a Thor's hammer on him, and it was getting picked up, and we had to speak about it.
Right. If we don't try to speak out on our views, the far right folkish will. And that's going to be what people think of when they hear the word heathen or Asatru. They're not going to think of Joe Heathen, who wears a modest Thor's hammer and is a good husband and family man and pillar of the community. They're going to think of the QAnon shaman with the tattoos and the Native American horned headdress, prancing through the Capitol and chanting or whatever it is that he was doing. We have to define ourselves in the public eye, or there's other groups that will do it for us. And that will end up scaring off a lot of perfectly good people who would otherwise be terrific heathens.
Yeah. And that's, and I want to give a shout out to our public relations team, our communications team. They work very hard to try to steer people away from that, using social media, using search engine optimization. And I'm very proud of the work that they all do.
Right.
And I just want to say, I am very proud of the work that group does, that Piper and that Benny the Younger does. They really put in a lot of work to try to because it's easier to divert someone from radicalization than it is to de-radicalize someone.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah,
a
it's a lot
that's just
harder to get
factual.
out one it's a lot harder to get out of that rabbit hole once you've gone down it.
Yeah, and I say that as someone who is friends with someone who was like a radical right-wing white supremacist who has come out and helps other people get out.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and
And
if so,
yeah, go ahead.
and so if it's hard, and so I just want to commend them, and as well as you, Ben, because the our Troth books have definitely been recommended even outside of the Troth to people as beginner books, as alternatives to
Mhm.
the stuff that's out there.
All right. One thing I want to add, and that was tripped by our questioner using the title normie, and it's something I worry about a little bit with our Troth because this thing is freaking big. This is over 700 pages, and this is the bibliography part of it, and I think we're well up to, I'm not even sure, we're well up over 200 references in multiple languages, and some of them very obscure titles. The uh, interlibrary lone librarian runs and hides when she sees me coming now because I keep requesting the darndest things. I
How
worry
many have
that
you broken now?
what's that?
How many
Yeah,
have you
I've
gone
used
through?
up 3 interlibrary loan librarians at my university, and I worry, the Troth was founded by a bunch of very deeply dedicated nerds. Um, Edward Thorson had a doctorate in Germanic studies. Kveldolf got one as well. Jim Chisholm, the first steersman, also did. And we've long had this reputation for being exceptionally bookish. And I want to make sure it's understood that this is also a place for people who are not called to be scholars and don't really want to, you know, learn obscure languages or read enormous books with footnotes in Gothic or what have you, but who just want to be decent human beings, doing what they do. I think there has to be a place for people who are, I don't want it to turn into the kind of one-upmanship that I used to see on some of the Reconstructionist forums, where newbies would come in and they'd get answers like, "What? You mean you don't have all 3 volumes of Richthofen's Friesische Rechtsquelle on your shelf? Huh, go join the Wiccans, noob. We
And
can't afford that."
so that brings us up to something,
Mhm.
Mr. Shope,
Yes.
my dear friend. I think that this kind of does bring up something, and that is you are always open to people who might want to say, write a more plain language book on heathenry, a more
Mhm.
simplified general guide.
Right. We need stuff in our publications locker for everybody. And I certainly am. I know we were working on one for a while.
And then COVID.
And then COVID, yeah, that kind of
I
took quite a bit of the out of the wind out of everybody's sails, not just the Troths.
Well, I work in public health, and that took most of everything from me for a
Mhm.
while.
Yeah. I mean, that's why that and the isolation is why we haven't put up a lot of new podcast episodes for a long
Yeah.
time. Just kind of sapped everybody's might and main, as it were.
So,
But we
yeah.
are certainly open to publishing books that people want to make available. Uh, After our Troth, the next thing we've got in the pipeline is a devotional to hell. And we did a multi-author Loki book last year. Um, and oh, good grief, I'm losing count.
I'm still taking submissions for the Book of Ritual.
Right.
Hint,
Yeah.
hint, please submit things, people. I need them.
Yeah, we put out a book of bloats. This was the first Troth publication I was involved with that saw the light of day back in 2004. And again, it was good for the time and it's still in print, but we can improve on it now. We can do better. We've moved on quite a bit from where we were in 2004.
So we are kind of getting towards the end here, Ben. So I want to, first of all, tell people, when is their first opportunity to buy Volume 3?
We are still on track to get it out at Trothmoot 2022.
So if you want to buy it first, you got to come to Trothmoot. After that, it will be on sale at our usual haunts.
Right. At our print-on-demand publisher is lulu.com. It will also be distributed on Amazon and on barnesandnoble.com. It should be, I have no way of checking this, but it should be in the Ingram database, and Ingram is the primary distributor of books to bookstores and libraries.
Yes.
So it should be possible for local bookstores to order the book if they know about it. And in answer to the question that always comes up, we do have PDF ebooks. Turning our Troth with all of the illustrations that we've added and all of the formatting into other ebook formats is like wrestling an entire school of Architeuthis, giant squid, kind of like that scene in Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea where they're fighting a bunch of giant octopus that are trying to eat the submarine. It's kind of like that, but not as much fun. We're trying. We will try to get this out. It may take longer than people want to. I know there's a demand there, but it's not really a simple task. I almost forgot. I'm afraid I kind of let this drop, and we need to get this going again. But we've got our first audiobook that we're going to be releasing soon, recorded by a member who is an able voice artist, and it's just between our Troth and my day job. Sometimes I tend to forget things, but
yeah.
But yeah, we are trying to get into the audiobook biz as well. And anybody that wants to help, drop me a line.
And then the other thing that I want to toss out here is the Shopes Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the Shopes Challenge for 2022.
Okay. Believe it or not, people still go to libraries and still read books on paper, darndest thing, and check them out and even occasionally return them. And libraries, are often strapped for budget constraints. And many libraries may not have a great deal of books on, heathen adjacent topics, and not necessarily Troth books, but books just solid introductions to Norse mythology or, prehistory or things like that. So the Shopes Challenge is to see who can donate the most books to a local academic or public library. Now, if you just walk in with an armful of books and drop them there, they'll probably put them in the annual library book sale. So this involves actually seeing what they've got on the shelves, and then finding a librarian and saying, hey, I know there's people in this community that are interested in, Viking religion or something like that. You don't have to identify as heathen if you don't want to. I'd like to donate a couple of books that I think there would be demand for. And if they go for it, then you do it and you try to get them on the shelves. And again, they don't have to be specifically heathen books. They don't have to be Troth books. Although if you do feel like it, that would be nice, but they don't have to be. And something to remember is that libraries participate in the interlibrary loan program, meaning that every copy that you donate may end up not just helping local readers, but may be loaned out all over the country potentially. So the Shope's challenge is to see who can donate the most books onto library shelves. And did we decide the deadline was Troth Moot 2022?
This is your thing. I don't know.
Okay. I need to go back and see
Yeah.
when the deadline is. But yeah, there will be something nice done for whoever manages to get the most books onto library shelves.
Well, Ben, I want to thank you so much for being here with us. Got a couple announcements want to get out before we wrap up for the night. Saturday is the Heathen Essentials study group. That's going to be from noon to 3 Eastern time. And then our monthly virtual moot hosted by our wonderful scribe of the Troth is going to be on Sunday. That's going to be at 2 p.m. Eastern. So come hang out with all of your Troth members and have a good time. And we will kind of hang out and talk. And also, election season is coming up if you're a Troth member and are interested in running for the High Read. That is going to be coming up. So expect some announcements about that soon. And finally, if you're interested in helping out in Ukraine, Red Hammer has issued an alert. There is a desperate need for help, and you can go to the Troth website. Right there on the front page, there is a banner. You click there, and it'll take you directly to where you can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know at least one heathen who is Ukrainian, and she fortunately has managed to get out of Kyiv. But yeah, there are heathens and pagans among the affected people.
Yeah, I've been following the Ukrainian Troth Association, which is separate from us, but is a Ukrainian heathen group. I've been following their Facebook page to see how they are, and it's grim. I'm not gonna lie. So, just a few things to check out, and so thank you once again for being here with us, Ben. I'm struggling not to sign off like this is the podcast. It's really hard.
Mm-hmm. What, with a hearty wassail, y'all?
Yeah, wassail, y'all. So, but everyone have a wonderful evening, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Not, and I believe, as I'm sitting here stumbling, give me just a second, guys. I apologize. Because I need to open my calendar because I just blanked on who is going to be here in 2 weeks because I've got shows actually scheduled. I know 4 weeks from now, our live show is going to be with Winifred Hodge Rose talking about her new soul lore book.
You mean this?
And then coming up on the 30th, I'm actually not entirely... It's not loading. Looks like coming up on the 30th, I don't know who's going to be here on the 30th, but we'll have somebody. It'll be awesome. We'll try.
It'll be awesome. It always is.
Yeah. And then coming up at some point in the next few weeks, we're also going to have Diana Paxson here to talk about clergy. So I'm excited about that. So everybody have a wonderful night. And we will see you guys.
Farewell, outfeeders, and good night.
Take care.
Adieu to you and you and you.